Thank you to everyone who is joining us. Today we have a topic, as Erica alluded to, that has some passion around it. So I'm really excited to have Erica here today to talk about diet culture, looking at where does body acceptance fit in that, and specifically during this time of life of menopause. So I am Stacy Kazanchuk. I am a registered dietitian, nutritionist, exercise physiologist, and the director of Geneve's Health Coaching. And here with me today is Erica Mauk, and she is going to introduce herself and what she does and the focus of her business. And then we'll jump into today's topic.
Sounds good. Thanks, Stacy. So I'm Erica Mauk. I'm also a registered dietitian nutritionist. I'm located in Seattle, Washington. I have degrees in nutrition and psychology, and I'm also a certified intuitive eating counselor. I also own my own practice, and in that practice, I really work on supporting clients, helping their relationship with food and with their body, helping them really feel more in control. And a lot of it really is helping them actually become the expert of their own body in terms of how they're feeling, in terms of what types of food they're needing or how much food they're even needing. I strongly believe that all of us actually have that expert role inside of us. And so much of what we hear out there in culture, and like we'll talk about today, diet culture, actually hides a lot of that or tells us we shouldn't listen to it. So I'm pretty passionate about everyone really being able to have those tools and access them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erica. And I agree and really look forward to having your expertise around this, given your experience and the work that you do with your clients. From looking at the clients that I work with and that the coaching team works with, a big thing that comes up during menopause is the changes that happen to a woman's body. And it can be hard in our culture where we do see and are exposed to a lot of expectations around what a woman's body should look like, finding where a woman going through menopause fits in this. Before we get started with these webinars, I always like to put out the disclaimer that I myself am premenopausal, so I cannot say that I've experienced a hot flash or that I know exactly what that feels like. Certainly through the training I've had through Geneve and the clients I work with, I want to help women through that and certainly can help with managing the symptoms, and that's part of our role here at Geneve, but want to put that out there that I have not experienced menopause, so I think that's important to call out. The other thing related to this topic is the fact that for myself, when it comes to diet culture, I do have the privilege of being in a body that is accepted by diet culture. So the changes that women during menopause experience, just putting it out there that I've not had that with the body, with my body shape and size. So I think that's important to always recognize, but certainly in the discussion, we're all part of this culture and we all can play a role in improving it for everyone.
Definitely. Stacey, I think that call out is so good. I'm also premenopausal, so I've not gone through menopause. I would say about 30% of my clients are either post or in menopause right now, or I guess perimenopausal also. So really because of that, I obviously have not gone through it, but I've heard a lot about it and discussed a lot about it. I've actually also explored it pretty intimately with my own mother, just to start to understand some of that journey and just to continue to have the discussion around menopause, because it is not a discussion that we're having enough as women.
Yep.
I also like to acknowledge my other own privileges as well. I'm in a thinner body. I'm also a cis white het woman, or a cis het white woman. So those also put a certain lens on how I view things and also how the world has treated me and impacted me as well.
Yeah, important call, especially with this conversation. So we use that lens as we jump into this. And one of the things that I want to talk about first, Erica, is this. A lot of times women have shame and guilt around their change in body size, especially with the change in belly fat. That comes up a lot. How can I get rid of my belly fat? And this feels like the changes are out of their control. What have you seen in your work and the research that you've done? How does diet culture influence this and how women view their bodies?
Such a great question. I think if possible, first I'm actually just going to define diet culture for many of us who may not be as aware of it. We live in a culture that is surrounded by dieting. What does that mean? It means that we're often focused on body goals, for example, or we're focused, super hyper focused on what we're eating, or, if what we're eating is good or bad. Food has become really either a poison or a cure a lot of the times. I actually am just going to read this definition of diet culture because it's such a phenomenal one. A fellow dietitian, Christy Harrison, has created this definition. So it's a system of beliefs that really worships thinness and equates it to health and moral virtue. It promotes weight loss as a means of attaining a higher moral status and health status, demonizes certain foods and food groups as a way of eating that actually can help elevate people or gives them the illusion of being elevated. And then lastly, it oppresses people who don't match up to this picture of health and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
So that last piece I think is so important for why the pressure is on all of us to keep this particular body, or why the pressure is in particularly as we age to stay the same size, or to still have that flat stomach, for example. I like to think of menopause a lot of the times, and so do a lot of other practitioners, in terms of the body acceptance mindset, as kind of a second puberty,
Mm-hmm.
because hormones are shifting so dramatically. And if you can remember back to when puberty first happened, your body changed dramatically then as well, right? Most of us probably got hips, most of us had a chest for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And that also was an intense time when body image was probably rocky for a lot of us. And menopause has a lot of similarities to that. One thing I think is also really important to remember is that, the belly is the center of our body. And as women are going through menopause, one of the primary reasons that the belly is shifting and changing is because it's protective for our body. The belly fat cells have the ability to actually produce estrogen. So because of that, your body is taking this innate wisdom that it has and naturally doing this so that it can protect you from osteoporosis and osteopenia, so that it can potentially reduce hot flashes, for example. So diet culture has basically taken this wonderful thing that our bodies naturally do to protect us and really made it something that we've been told to hate. So I think this culture, and diet culture in general, makes it incredibly challenging, but also puts this pressure on us a lot of the times. And because of that, it actually also keeps our focus basically just on our bodies and just on what we're eating, instead of the phenomenal life that we could be living, or instead of the families that we might have, that we get to celebrate and enjoy, and really instead of living life. So that was a very long-winded answer to your question, but clearly I just wanted to throw a bunch in there because I think the pressure that women feel in particular, and in particular as we age, is almost a fictionless, or it's a fiction that was created in terms of diet culture that really shouldn't exist. And it's actually oppressing most of us by telling us that our bodies shouldn't change and that our mind should just be focused on our bodies not changing.
Yeah, no, I agree that the oppression, and I would say that that is something that stands out in the women that we work with. There is this oppression that, and it didn't just happen when they started menopause. It's almost like this accumulation over time. Would you agree? Is that a fair assessment in terms of years of oppression, not just, oh, I'm in perimenopause, now all of a sudden I'm experiencing this oppression?
Yes, definitely. I would say it happens for a lot of us actually as soon as our bodies start to change as we grow. A lot of my clients I work with can have distinct memories from maybe third grade or sixth grade when their body suddenly became the focus because it might have started to change. And I think part of what happens with menopause is not only is it that cumulative years of being under this pressure, but also because we are wonderful, phenomenal human beings who have lived to 40 and 50 years and have this whole complex, life. When our body starts to change again, sometimes it feels even less like ours. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's that conflict in particular.
Yeah.
Some statistics show that actually three-quarters of women in their 40s and 50s and above hate their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Yeah.
just a huge amount, right? And I think that
Yeah.
clearly shows how that can be impacting us. Because if we
Yes.
really just have something that we dislike so much, but yet we live in every single day, how can that be impacting our mental health or our
Mhm.
emotional well-being, or even kind of how we view ourselves day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think that that discomfort of being in something, being in a body that you don't like, that you maybe don't have respect for, or like you described, doesn't feel like your own anymore, which there is that disconnect. And certainly that can be a combination of the changes of hormones, as well as the change in the body. And what I typically see is this: women feel this need because so many women too are very driven, and have been able to fix or control things for so long. Now they see dieting as a way of fixing their body. Can you share your thoughts on that, and where does that fall within the diet culture complex?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So it falls within it because that pressure, I think, actually directly comes from diet culture.
Mhm.
That desire to fix our bodies a lot of the times is, again, what diet culture tells us we can do or should do or are expected to do. But in terms of dieting, in terms of fixing our bodies, we've essentially been sold a lie when it comes to weight loss.
Mhm.
When we're thinking about weight loss, most people can lose weight in about the 2 to 6 month period. And usually that's done with calorie counting or restriction or things like that, which actually increase stress hormones in the body a lot, which can impact, health overall, can impact sleep. If we're increasing stress, especially while going through menopause, that could potentially increase hot flashes too, for example.
Mhm.
Um, After that 6 month period, what the research really shows is that from the next 2 to 5 years, 95 to 98% of people gain weight back, usually more than what they lost initially. And that research was actually as clear or as direct a link as lung cancer and smoking.
Wow, that's impactful, especially a lot of times I hear women, I need to lose weight to be healthy, because we hear weight is associated with diabetes, heart disease, all of these chronic conditions. The messaging starts to be lose weight and you avoid these, or at least that's what they're hearing.
Sure, definitely. And Stacey, I think that brings up a really great point of what is health really.
Mm.
Diet culture has really just taken it to be food and how much we move, basically. But health is our physical, social, mental, and emotional well-being. And so little of that is actually food and how much we're moving, really. Some of the research even shows that actually only 10% of our health in terms of diet and lifestyle is under our control, which is a
Hmm.
pretty small percentage when we think of it from that idea.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying these weight loss statistics just to make people feel like all is lost,
Mhm.
because there's so much you can do to support your health that has nothing to do with weight loss.
Mhm.
If we're looking at how much we're eating, how regularly we're eating, our body needs regular food. Our body needs breakfast a lot of the times. If we're
Yeah.
looking at some of the different ways that we're feeling satisfied with food, that's something that can actually improve health. If anyone's heard of the French paradox, it's kind of this idea that the French eat food that tends to be very rich and cheesy and filled with meat and really quite delicious. And
Yeah.
their health tends to be better than most people in the United States, and their longevity tends to be better, as well as their heart disease risk. And there's a lot of thought that potentially, and some research too, but thought that that satisfaction factor is actually
Mm.
improving health more than worrying about what we're eating.
Yeah, no, and I like also that you are pointing out that you can still focus on food and through a different lens, a different relationship. Sometimes when I start to talk about this idea of diet culture and shifting the focus from weight to other metrics of health or what health looks like, women will say, I'm not ready to give up. I need to, I need to do it this way, or that they feel like shifting that focus means that they're giving up versus trying a new way.
I love that question, Stacey. And my first piece or my first thought is giving up what?
Mm.
Is this giving up controlling around food? Is this giving up feeling guilt and shame around food? Is this giving up trying to just shrink ourselves or to have a body that we may have had when we were 30, which 30 years of experience or 20 years of experience should not equal the same body, right? Years of kids should not equal the same body. So I think giving up what is kind of the key piece to experiment with or to explore. And this approach that I recommend isn't giving up on your body, because it's actually tuning into your body in an entirely different way.
Mm,
I like to think that diet culture has actually kind of almost severed the connection between our body and our brain,
mhm,
because it's telling us basically we should just be thinking from the brain side of things. And the
mhm,
approach that I really recommend is actually reconnecting those pieces. So it's not giving up on your body, it's actually reconnecting to it in a way that research has been shown proves mental well-being, reduces body dissatisfaction,
mhm,
improves many, many health markers such as cholesterol, blood pressure, and blood sugar,
mhm.
as well as stress hormones overall.
Um, and I love that you're bringing those points up, and especially when we think about, we started talking at the beginning that we need to bring conversation to menopause, and how do we continue changing these things? Because I don't think people hear this idea around connecting with your body more can have these outcomes that we know are supported by research, but diet culture makes it louder that no, it's weight loss and it's restriction and it's exercising more. This all gets you the outcomes that you're looking for. How can we work on changing that conversation that's been ingrained for so long?
Yeah, I think that's again, I love that question too, because I think that's one of the pieces that we have to be doing.
Hmm.
I would say first, explore how you're talking to yourself. A lot of the times we are our own worst critic and talk to ourselves in a way we would never talk to someone else. I mean, can you imagine saying to yourself the things you say to yourself, saying to someone you love, or saying to your kids, or saying to your dog, or your partner, or your significant other? They would probably leave pretty quickly or sever any relationship unless they were a pet, I suppose. We are just
Hmm.
pretty mean to ourselves. We bash ourselves a lot. Shifting that dialogue is potentially one of the first areas to look at, because our body is listening.
Hmm.
Um, there's one blogger who's also a fat activist that I really love. Her name's Your Fat Friend.
Hmm.
She's on Twitter and both Instagram, and she recently was tweeting about how she's looking at the research of what body dissatisfaction can do for us.
Hmm.
And just the thought that even I feel fat can actually increase potential disordered eating behaviors. It can increase stress. It can increase really risk of restriction, but also really a lot of health. It can increase some of the negative health outcomes because of just what that feeling or just what those words can do for us. So
Yeah.
if you are beating yourself up, and a lot of us are, try going neutral first. Let's say
Mm.
you're feeling pretty bad about your arms or something like that. You know, instead of thinking that your arms look this certain way or calling them, pretty mean words, instead, what can you think? I have arms, and what have your arms done?
Mm.
Who did they lift up? Who did they embrace? Who did they hold? Who have they helped keep the house clean forever, or cooked how many meals? Your arms have been there the entire time and done all of that for you. Same thing with your legs. You know, your legs have maybe run miles or run circles around your partner, for example, in terms of getting things done and being accomplished and just making sure things are done on a day-to-day basis. Your
Mm.
body has been here for you the entire time, and
Mm.
potentially just shifting that dialogue from being negative to neutral can
Mm.
be one small shift of starting to feel like you can actually live in a world that is swimming in diet culture a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Next, I would say look at representation matters. What other women are you seeing that are either post-menopausal or going through menopause that are thriving? One
Hmm.
I love to think about, and unfortunately she's gone now, Carrie Fisher
Mm.
from Star Wars. She talked a lot about how her people would say that she, sort of her body had shifted a lot since the first Star Wars. And she said, of course it did. I'm a woman. My body is expected to change, and look how much I've lived.
Hmm.
So really just changing that dialogue. If you're on social media, if you're following someone and you're recognizing that the account is making you feel bad about your body, or feeling like you need to change, or feeling like you need to eat less or eat differently, I recommend unfollowing that account.
Hmm.
I recommend following accounts that really help build you up, accounts that remind you that your body has value no matter what, but
Hmm.
also ones that really help shift the dialogue and shift the conversation. And there's a lot of great ones that can potentially do that.
Yeah.
Last is experiment, or not experiment, but explore who you're talking with. If you're
Hmm.
surrounded by a group of friends who are all beating up on their bodies, that is just going to be a hard environment to feel differently about. What would it be like to have a conversation with your group of friends and to shift it and say, what if we just start lifting each other up and talking about each other in these phenomenal ways, and complimenting personality characteristics versus body, for example, or what we're wearing?
Hmm.
So those are three small areas that I feel like in terms of each of our life, we can start to shift the conversation and the dialogue a little bit.
I love those. And all things that they're tangible. You don't have to go out and buy anything to do that. You don't have to, plan. I mean, maybe it might be helpful for some individuals to plan a day to start that if it is going to be a big transition, but it can be something that you do start tomorrow, without feeling like takes all this time. It's really this shift of mindset that's there.
And I
And
think, Stacey, one of the reasons why diet culture is so pervasive is because it's a $60 million plus industry, and they thrive on women not liking their own bodies. That's
yeah.
the industry has been able to stay so pervasive, unfortunately, is because of that. So think of, instead of, maybe if you feel like this is giving up, it's giving up basically the patriarchy and a $60 million industry that wants you to feel bad about yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. From a business standpoint, they've done very well. And however, they're taking advantage of, especially women, in terms of being able to make that money. So they're profiting off of someone else's sacrifice.
I would say especially women, and especially um, peri and post-menopausal women, right?
Hmm.
I think that especially because our bodies are changing so much during that time, they are
Hmm.
specifically preying on us as a population when we get to that age, and specifically really focusing on the fact that our body isn't the same that it was.
Yeah. And, when we look, as you mentioned at the beginning, that the body is doing things that protects, is a protective mechanism. And our body is always looking to survive. Physiologically, the body wants to work in a way to support survival and function. And we are so quick to think that we're flawed when menopause has been happening for as long as women have existed. There is so there's this process that we've let diet culture tell us is wrong, when in fact it's actually the body doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And it's keeping us alive, right? It's
Hmm.
keeping us healthy. It's purposely doing that. And on that note too, I mean, weight gain is normal, period. Yes, it's normal during menopause, but it's normal in life, period. And a lot of research really actually shows that even being a slightly larger body size than you might want to be or might feel comfortable at is protective from the health perspective, because as we age and tend to be more susceptible to diseases and illnesses, having that extra life preserver or extra sort of cushion is really beneficial in terms of health outcomes. So if longevity is something that you're really hoping for, it can be really protective actually to let your body be the size that is most natural for it, and to not be fighting it as much.
Yes. Yeah. And a lot of times we hear a lot about cortisol being this stress hormone, and clients that get very concerned with, having cortisol or having too much stress with weight gain.
Mhm.
But, we've talked a lot about how these thoughts can cause stress in the body. Um, are you familiar with the research? Is there research showing that even these thoughts can have that impact of that increase of cortisol specifically?
Definitely. Yeah, there is definitely research in terms of that. And that is also one of the thoughts around why dieting fails so regularly, is because it does really increase that cortisol. And not only does it increase the cortisol, but I think because it shifts how we think about food when we're
Mhm.
dieting, right? Food inherently becomes good or bad or supportive or unsupportive. It creates actually a lot of guilt and shame around specific foods, which also increases the cortisol level. I think that's one of the reasons why when people start to shift their focus from dieting to instead focusing on body acceptance, but also even just connecting with their body in terms of eating and pieces like that, why there's such an improvement in health outcomes, because overall stress is lower, overall guilt and anxiety tends to be lower, especially around food.
Yeah. And I think we associate stress so much with, work stress or life stress, and that dieting or exercising, and doing these things that we're supporting our health should not be stressful. But when in fact some of those processes, can induce more stress on the body.
Definitely. Yes, I think that's such a great call out, Stacey, is that, yeah, the worry alone and the anxiety of food either being that poison or that cure, or our body not looking a certain way, does negatively impact health. And I
Okay.
think that that's one other great piece I'd love to bring up, which is just weight stigma. Fat prejudice is one of the biggest, it's actually one of the most widely accepted prejudices, and that alone, and weight stigma alone, which is just assuming someone's health basically based on their body size, that also has negative health outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Go ahead.
so I was going to say, part of finding this community and part of like focusing again on those actions that you can do in terms of shifting the conversation and shifting the dialogue, and even finding people that are accepting their bodies and feeling proud in their bodies, all of that can kind of shift how we're thinking about it, and hopefully, not hopefully, but reduce cortisol, reduce stress, and reduce some of those feelings.
Awesome. Well, we have a message from one of our viewers on the Facebook Live, and they said, I weigh 50 pounds over my ideal weight for a woman of my height. My doctor quit harping on it when every year my blood work, tons of them, came back within normal limits year after year. Once I accepted my new body, I quit feeling sorry for myself and started moving again. I'm working with one of your health coaches who is wonderful, and we are tweaking my diet so I can be the healthiest version of my new self, and I'm already feeling better. It's worth the mind shift to appreciate who we are and where we are in the journey. And I think those are more of the messages we need to hear, that it is possible, versus so many of the messages that show that making yourself smaller and doing the restriction is where the results are. There is this whole other lens that's being ignored when we are only focusing on certain aspects, food restriction or increased exercise.
Right, or body size. I think that's such a great point too, because what that really highlights is that your health is not tied to your body size.
Mm-hmm.
You can be healthy basically at any size,
Mm-hmm.
which is also one of the lenses that I practice from, something called Health at Every Size. And what that really also focuses on is, again, what health is. And health is not a body size. I mean, you can't look at a body and just tell how healthy it is or not.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly with BMI, or body mass index, it was based off of white men, not women, and not a diverse population at all. And it hasn't been evidence-based really in terms of research showing that BMI has direct correlations with health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's another message that we hear out there too. I'm often having to clarify with women that the BMI metric is not going to be the most effective thing to measure your health. Not effective at all at measuring your health, especially given all of the things that leaves out. All it's looking at is height and weight. So there's a lot of other factors that are missing there. Erica, you mentioned a couple of strategies around looking at food and nutrition through a different lens. I could wonder if you could go into some of those, maybe ones that you have found to be effective with the clients that you're working with, some to focus on first. It sounds like there's a lot there that people could look at.
Yeah, there definitely is a lot. One of the first ones that I actually recommend looking at is a lot of the times hunger and fullness.
Mm-hmm.
If you have been dieting for a number of years, and many women have, you will most likely not feel it or not pay attention to it as much, because as a dieter, you're most likely ignoring hunger. I think that's one other thing that diet culture has, another lie it's told us, is that hunger is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think of hunger and fullness as innate as breathing and using the restroom.
Mm-hmm.
We don't ignore those. We don't tell ourselves, oh, I just peed, I shouldn't pee again. But we do that all the time with food. And yet if we're hungry, we say, oh, I just ate, I shouldn't be hungry again.
Mm-hmm.
So really dialing in and listening to some of those, learning what hunger is like for your body, learning what fullness is like for your body. Halfway through a meal, experiment with stopping and just seeing how you feel. If you're still hungry, continue to eat. If you recognize that you're actually feeling a little bit full, what could you learn about that?
Mm-hmm.
Next, I think kind of looking at what we're eating. And when I say that, what I'm kind of thinking is, are you having carbohydrates? Are you having protein? Are you having fiber? And are you having fats? Because that combination of food gives our body energy. It gives our body protein, which the energy, so the carbohydrate and the protein combo actually can help keep that stress level a little bit more consistent as well, and not as high.
Mm-hmm.
And that combination really keeps us satisfied the most. So if you're having protein, carbohydrates, fiber, and fats, and it was a meal, for example, I would expect that to keep most of us full for about 3 to 4 hours. Yeah. If you're missing one of those, let's say you're missing carbohydrates, I would expect you to be hungrier than the 3 to 4 hours, for example, or not feel as satisfied afterwards.
That's such a great starting point because I do think, again, going back to this disconnect between the head and the rest of the body, um, that women sometimes don't even remember what it's like to be hungry or full, or fullness sometimes is recognized a little bit more than the hunger, but there can be times where it's just like they don't even know. We don't even know if we're not paying attention to it. And one of the things that I find is really fascinating with that exercise is a lot of times discover other things like, oh, certain foods that make you feel more satisfied or not. I also find with the changes in the hormones during perimenopause and menopause, the hunger can change, or there is more um, food cravings maybe, and typically it tends to be more for sugar or fat type foods. But diving in, why is that, and is there a way to still enjoy the chocolate you're having in the afternoon without that shame and guilt, and either enjoying other foods with it or experimenting what allows you to truly enjoy that versus sitting down and feeling bad that you're having that chocolate every day at 3.
I think one other piece with that too is, let's say you are feeling bad for having the chocolate every day at 3. That would also not only increase the guilt and shame, but sometimes maybe increase the desire to restrict it or the desire to not have it. And one thing I find very often is the more that we restrict or tell ourselves we're not going to have the chocolate, pretty soon we might eat the whole bag of chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times it's almost like this rebel inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's the rebel inside of us, but sometimes it's also real hunger.
Yeah.
So I think those combinations are incredibly powerful. And that's really what kind of getting rid of that moralization of food, getting rid of food being good or bad, can actually allow
Mm-hmm.
people to just tune in to like what is satisfying, what's happening behind it. And often when we eat food that is more satisfying, we feel better sooner and feel fuller sooner.
Yeah.
And
I that with that the good and bad classification of food comes up a lot. Sometimes I feel bad for food. Like, what did the white bread ever do to you? You're calling it bad. Like, can't even defend itself. And the same thing. Sometimes women will internalize that I was good because I had a salad. I was bad because I had a cupcake. And even those thoughts seem like they all of a sudden it's going to start that spiral of that negative conversation versus really focusing on what does your body need at that time.
definitely. And I think food really shouldn't be moral, right? Like I love your example of the white bread, right? White bread has gotten this terrible um, reputation, but it's delicious. And it goes great dipping it in olive oil, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And when we are allowed to enjoy the food just for enjoying the food, we actually feel like food a lot of the times has less power over
Mm-hmm.
us. I think one great example is if you've ever felt like you can't keep a bag of potato chips in your house. Sometimes that's because we either feel like we're going to eat the whole bag, and sometimes if we don't keep it or allow ourselves to have it very often, we do eat the whole bag. Or it's because sometimes we've been feeling like we are so restricted from it that it has this power over us that we are
Mm-hmm.
unable to stop. And I have just seen with so many of my clients that there's incredible power when they start to shift that dialogue in terms of if food is good or bad and just make it neutral.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of food actually loses its power. They can keep
Yeah.
bags of potato chips in their house and they don't even think about it most of the time.
Yeah. And a good reminder too of like physiology is always going to win. If you are hungry or you do want those potato chips and you keep thinking about it, eventually it's going to happen. So either embrace it, or again, figure out how to get this neutrality and experimenting going on. And our bodies are extremely resilient. Having a bag of potato chips is not going to you're not going to wake up the next morning with heart disease. Like that's not how it works.
Definitely. And if you were hungry, your body actually probably feels a lot better
Right.
after too.
Yeah, exactly. One thing I want to come back to, you touched on this and then we had some great conversation going, but I wanted to come back to the weight stigma point that you were making, or the fat stigma. And related to healthcare too, can you talk a little bit more about some of what we're seeing in terms of individuals that and maybe like our participant who, had her doctor harping on her, finally quit harping on her when finally there was blood labs, when before they may have just been looking at her body size, how that impacts people's health, those conversations.
Yeah, that's such a great call out, Stacey. One thing I also want to mention is, I do consider myself a fat positive dietitian, and
Mhm.
I just want to address that term first. Fat is a word that a lot of fat activists have been trying to reclaim, because if we think about it, it really is similar to tall and short, right? Thin, fat, tall, and short, and things like that. So I'll use the word fat a lot of the times to describe larger bodies, but I'll also just be careful with who has decided to reclaim the word or who hasn't. So instead of usually using words that are weight stigmatizing, like obese or overweight, and often I'll put those in quotes, I'll use smaller bodies and larger bodies a lot of the time.
Mhm.
So like I had mentioned, fat prejudice is the most widely accepted prejudice in the world today, basically. And that unfortunately has extended a lot into our medical care system because of things like the body mass index and BMI. The medical system assumes that a body coming in at a specific size must have all of these different health conditions.
Mhm.
So what will happen more often than not is someone who is in a larger body will go to the doctor, and then the first thing they'll be told is just simply to lose weight.
Mm.
And a lot of the times I've heard from many of my clients and many people in fat bodies that the doctor won't even be addressing what they were coming in for.
Mm.
For example,
Yeah.
one of my clients had a sore throat and was told to lose weight. So
Mm.
one question I love to have my clients ask if they go to the doctor, and that's one of the first things their doctor says, is if someone was in a smaller body and came in with the same symptoms, what would you say to them?
Mhm.
And that can potentially help to shift some of that and remove at least some of the stigma from the doctor's office. Also, you don't actually have to be weighed at the doctor's office unless it's for a medical reason, or like not a medical reason, but a medicine reason often, or unless it potentially could be directly related to weight, which is actually quite rare. So
Okay.
if that's something that you'd want to experiment with too, or feel comfortable doing, there's no need that you have to be weighed at the doctor's office or have that discussion with your doctor, especially if you're there to explore or look at other pieces.
Yeah, no, that's a good point too. And again, that comes not only changing that conversation. I love that question of if I was in a smaller body, would you have the same recommendations right now? Like, let's change that. If I was behind a screen, what would this be? What would be different? But that also helps people as we look at changing the whole conversation. Playing that role to get people thinking, we got to make this shift and we all have to do a part in that.
Mhm.
That we all have a role in how we shift those conversations so people can get the care they need based off of what their true symptoms are and what they're looking for.
Definitely. And I think one thing I'd like to add to that too is that there is nothing wrong with being fat or nothing wrong with being in a larger body. It does not mean that your health is any specific way, period.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so much of what fat activists are trying to change as well, is that you cannot look at someone's body or what they are eating and assume anything about them really, especially as it relates to health.
Yeah.
Because health is so much more multifaceted than just body size.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about some of those other aspects. We spent a lot of time on the food piece of it as dietitians and individuals that both enjoy food. I think that might have been our natural tendency. But you mentioned stress management. What about things like movement, sleep, stress management, other factors that you see playing a role in this bigger picture?
Yeah, such a great question. I think as women, our number one instinct a lot of the time is self-sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that because we are nurturers, right? We genuinely do care and we want people to be their best selves, even a lot of the times at the expense of ourselves. So when it comes to things like sleep, that's a great one. Are you sacrificing yourself and sacrificing your sleep for other people? Sleep can impact health in many, many ways, right? When we are getting, for most of us, that 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep, that actually allows our brain, our spinal fluid to come in to flush our brain out, basically to clean it out overnight and allow us to have reduced stress, to have better blood sugar numbers, to have better longevity and cognitive health, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with stress, stress management. I think we live in a world, especially with this COVID environment,
Mm-hmm.
that is stressful, period. So
Yeah.
looking at the ways that you're supporting stress or you're trying to reduce or manage stress. I think I'm actually going to just strike reduce from that record if possible, because I don't know if there's too many ways that we can actually reduce it. So a lot of the times it's really just focusing on managing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that could mean taking 2 minutes and just sitting and listening to the birds, or just sitting and actually just saying, hey, body, I'm here. I'm listening to you, right? Even putting your hand like right here and listening to your heartbeat is incredibly connecting. Or if you have a vista anywhere that you can look out to, that also has actually been shown to just reduce cortisol levels as soon as you start to do that. And those are all things that can take just a few minutes here and there. I know that in this world, we would love to have hours long to meditate and things like that.
Right.
Just not as realistic as a lot of those wonderful gurus out there want us to think it is. So finding just smaller pieces
Mhm.
and eating something about every 3 to 4 hours, especially something with carbohydrates and protein, does support stress management as well.
Great
Um,
tips there.
movement.
Mhm.
Movement is probably one of the most, I would say, predictive factors in terms of overall health and longevity.
Mhm.
And this does not have to be strenuous all of the time or even most of the time, right? Even just walking actually has been shown to improve lifespan. So movement can be just reducing sedentary time or sitting time. It could
Mhm.
just be standing a little bit more. It can be 5-minute walks sprinkled throughout the day. You know, it can be picking up grandkids or playing with them. It's really just moving our bodies. And if it's a way that you enjoy, that's even better in terms of overall health.
Mhm.
Movement also usually does help support sleep and stress and things like that. So finding something that you enjoy, finding something that you can do sort of consistently is going to be something that really supports health outside of all of the other or outside of all of the other considerations as well.
I like how you put the sort of consistently there too, because that can be easy to get caught up in, I have to do this consistently, and if I can't do it consistently, why am I even doing it at all? And reflecting on the natural ebbs and flows of life. And I also notice with women during menopause too, there's ebbs and flows of energy.
Mm,
So there may be consistency is that 30-minute walk a few times a week for 2 weeks, but then there's a week where it's like, this is really hard to do. Um, and giving yourself permission again to listen to your body. Maybe there's a reason your body's saying, I don't have the energy for that 30-minute walk. Maybe some gentle yoga or other movement, or maybe it is a day that a nap, a 30-minute nap instead of the walk is really what your body needs.
Definitely, especially if hot flashes are keeping you up at night or even just making things stressful during the day. A 30-minute nap, if you can fit it in, can be something that's incredibly restorative. And I think
Mhm.
that's why I did this sort of consistent, as diet culture also will basically always tell us that we are never enough in terms of our routine, especially if it's not consistent. But um, any movement, just whenever it feels good, honestly, is going to be supportive of health. And the consistency, yeah, it's good in theory, but we all have lives. We all have things that we need to be doing. And so anytime we have the opportunity to take it, and when we can listen to our body to have rest, to give it that rest, it also supports health and a lot of the times mental health.
Yes, yeah, that mental health piece, and especially right now, we are in an interesting situation. We'll find out years from now what this pandemic does to our mental health, but it's not going to hurt to continue to work to support that mental health in a variety of different ways.
Definitely. Yes. That will be very interesting to see.
Well, before we start to wrap up here, I just want to give a reminder to everyone that if you have any questions, go ahead. If you're on Zoom, put them in the chat or the Q&A box. And if you're joining us on the Facebook Live feed, just go ahead and thread your questions below, and those will get sent over to us. One other question that's come to mind, Erica, and as you, with some of the things you've been saying, is what sometimes women will tell me, like, this concept or this thought is too idealistic. It's not realistic for them to, in their words, wake up every day and love their body. um, can you talk a little bit about how do we work this in without it, basically without lying? Like they're right. It's not, there's going to be some days that it's going to feel really hard to be in our bodies. And how do we work through that, and how does that fit?
Yeah. Especially, I think, well, I also think that the loving our body or body positivity, sometimes I think that's really been co-opted and tied into a lot of diet culture now, but also it's another thing we actually have to live up to. And so is
Mm-hmm.
loving our body, to be completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to love your body. I think I like to shift the dialogue a lot to just instead respecting it. And
Mm.
respecting it a lot of the times means giving it rest when it needs rest, and giving it food when it needs food, and giving it, um, energy when it needs energy, or water, all of those different pieces. So I think I also, a lot of times I like to shift the conversation and said, if we think that self-hatred or dislike of our body is here, and self-love is over here, all the way on the other side, a deep chasm. That jump, that's like jumping across the Grand Canyon. And that's impossible for all of us. So I think it's almost thinking of it instead of maybe even just being with your body. It doesn't mean that you have to love it. It doesn't mean that you have to fully accept every curve or every roll or every wrinkle, but instead it's honoring what your body has done so far. It's listening to what it wants now, and then it's trying to actually just be comfortable with it a lot of the times. You know, we are in a relationship with our body, whether we really want to be or not. And because if you think of any relationship, it takes time, it takes work, it takes listening, it takes learning, it takes adjusting to when it changes, just like we would probably do for a partner or a significant other a lot of the times in a relationship. So I want to take loving off the table. I think that it's a phenomenal aspiration. And I think that for a lot of us, especially when we've been told in a culture we need to be a certain size or look a certain way in order to love our body or in order to be valued, I think loving is a far stretch a lot of the times. So what about just accepting or being with?
Yeah, no, that's a great point of being realistic. It ends up playing off of this extreme all or nothing thinking that women have a tendency to have of, if I'm just loathing on my body, I just can't stand it. How am I ever going to be to this loving piece if that's not really how I feel? And I like that it comes back to that neutrality, experimenting and really getting to know your body. Perhaps it might be in a different way than you ever have before if you have been really engrossed in the diet culture for so many years.
Yeah, and I think, one other thing to think about is who gave you your body? What ancestors that you have? What great grandmother gave you those arms that wiggle a little bit or a lot? Or what grandmother gave you that belly? Or even grandfather gave you those eyebrows? I think there's a way to potentially connect to things that we often find really strengthening, which is our roots a lot of the time in terms of how we relate to our body, and just shifting that. Because if we're looking at whatever actress that we're comparing our body to, we have no relation to them whatsoever.
Right.
None of their body was ever going to be ours because we have completely different life stories and genetics.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other piece too, especially when it comes to menopause, I think it's okay to admit that some days it's going to be hard, and you have not been prepared adequately for menopause. We're working on changing that with Genevieve, but you are going into this phase of life that you didn't have a class on. I mean, most of us maybe got a class on puberty. That's another story. It may have still not been adequate, but there was no class on menopause. So it is going to be normal to maybe feel frustrated, maybe feel uncomfortable, and that's okay to embrace that. And as women, sometimes we are more likely to say, "I'm fine, I'm okay." You can say, "I'm not okay." Not okay. This is not fun. Hot flashes are not fun. And we're not here to say that you need to embrace hot flashes and enjoy those moments, or that you need to enjoy your body changing so quickly without knowing why. But that neutrality, coming to that neutrality and reconnecting to your body is important during this time.
And one other thing I'd love to add to that, Stacey, is let's say you are having a terrible day or it's not fun. That does not mean you are not fun. That does not mean you are terrible. This does not mean that you are any of those pieces, because your value and your worth does not change because of any of those. And who you are as a person is not impacted by those, even if menopause feels like it is sometimes. And even if it feels like it's just taking you and kind of throwing you against the wall a few times, like one of my clients said, that does not mean it is you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we did get one other question here we can finish up with, on further resources for menopause insomnia. This person mentioned that it feels like it impacts their eating and mood significantly, and that's certainly something with sleep. Do you have any suggestions on that, Erica, or strategies that have worked for your clients around the sleep piece and foods and mood?
Definitely. A few big ones, I think, is alcohol. Just looking at when you're having alcohol. For example, if you're having a glass from 3 to 5 p.m. a day versus at 7 to 9 p.m. a day, that might actually be helping insomnia a little bit. I'm not necessarily recommending everyone go to happy hour all the time, but that could be something to play around with if that glass is really important to you, or if for example.
Mhm.
Other pieces is maybe about 2.5, 3 hours before bed, having something that also has some carbohydrates in there,
Mhm.
because that can actually increase the serotonin and tryptophan level, which supports melatonin, for example.
Okay.
And then depending on clients, there are some supplements that you could always consider. So if you are working with one of the Genev coaches, I would recommend talking about that, or potentially speaking with someone one-on-one to see if those supplements would be right for you. But there's ones that can help lower body temperature a little bit. So glycine is one that I like to recommend a lot. But again,
Mm.
I would talk to any team member before adding that in.
Okay, great point. Yeah, and it comes back also to like sleep, suboptimal sleep certainly can impact where your food choices. Often when we're fatigued, we want something that's easy, that's going to give us energy. Again, our body's looking to protect us. You know, if we're fatigued, carbohydrates are going to provide energy very quickly. So again, addressing the sleep certainly can then impact those food choices as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was one of my favorite sleep coaches, or she was a sleep psychiatrist, maybe. She said, the harder we work on sleep, usually the less it happens. So I like to think of something called sleep promoting thoughts also, which is something I'll work on with my clients. Thinking I'm going to sleep really good tonight is actually not a sleep promoting thought, versus thinking whatever happens tonight, I'll still be awesome tomorrow. That's actually more of a sleep promoting thought, because it puts less stress on sleep. So sometimes those could be something to experiment with and explore as well, is the thoughts that we're thinking around sleep as we're going to bed or in bed.
Wow, like such a good point. It all comes back to changing the conversations we're having with ourselves to really help to change these conversations around our bodies, especially during this transitional time of life of menopause as well. Everything's all connected.
It really is. It's pretty amazing.
Well, Erica, as we finish up here, any other final thoughts on body acceptance, diet culture, menopause, how we change the conversation, anything that you want to share with our listeners? And then also, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, how could they do that?
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you. I think my final thought is I hope that potentially some of these have been new ideas, or challenging a lot of the ideas that we've heard, or that we've been told from diet culture. So I recommend taking a few moments and thinking about this, experimenting with it. What would it be like to feel like you didn't have to change your body? What would it be like to feel like your body was okay right now and you could still feed it and nourish it? And does that mean that you are not focusing on your health? No, there's ways to do that.
Mhm.
But it's kind of really just shifting, instead of I like to think of it as self-affirming care almost, or
Mhm.
the way that you're thinking about yourself is affirming yourself versus denying yourself.
Mhm.
I highly recommend curating social media and curating what you're looking at in terms of women's bodies and in terms of what we're thinking about food, because that is one piece that can be incredibly helpful when it comes to avoiding diet culture or trying to rid ourselves of it bit by bit. If anyone wanted to reach me, you can find me at my website is seattleeatwell.com. Also Erica Malk Nutrition, but that one's a lot harder to spell. So that's why I go with seattleeatwell.com. If anyone is on social media, feel free to find me at Erica Malk Nutrition. I'm also on Twitter, but not very often, to be honest. It's not my favorite of all the social medias. And then Facebook as well. And I work with clients usually on a one-to-one basis in terms of supporting a lot of these different pieces, figuring out for them really how to reconnect their head to their body a lot of the times. And again, just giving them the tools to be the expert of their own body in terms of finding out what their body is really saying and actually listening. And especially for a lot of my clients with menopause, that can be incredibly powerful, because a lot of the times their body doesn't feel like theirs.
Mm, excellent. Well, thank you so much. And really, we appreciate your time and expertise on this topic. So thank you for your contributions. And for anyone looking to work with one of our Genev health coaches, you can find information on our website under our plans and pricing page. And we also offer telemed services with our OBGYNs in 48 states. And we have both medical doctors and naturopathic practitioners. And same information can be found there if you're looking for more medical support during menopause. That's a piece that they can provide. So our next webinar, it will be a different day and time next week. We're actually going to be coming back on Tuesday at this, I guess it's the same time on Tuesday, the 1 p.m. time, Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to be talking to a urogenital gynecologist, and we're going to be going back to Female Anatomy 101 and talking about the female body. I think that's something we can all use a review on. For some people, it might be first time exposure, but understanding female anatomy and then what changes over time and what are normal changes. And this helps to understand why things are changing. And so to give you some more information on that. So we'll be here on Tuesday for that. So hope to join you then, or hope you join us then. And thank you again, Erica, for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you, Stacey. I appreciate it. And Genevieve, I love that you guys are opening the conversation to talk more about menopause with more women.